Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar. My name is Khalil, and I'm the head of content at Digital Niche Agency. Today, we have Vincent from Whooshh. Vincent, how are you doing today?
I'm doing great. Thanks, Khalil.
Of course, of course. And while people are coming into the chat here, do you want to just kind of give a quick background of yourself, Vince, and kind of explain the whole purpose of today's webinar?
Sure. Well, first of all, the background on myself here. I'm the CEO and one of the founders of the company. Have been with the company from the beginning, so got the whole history here. My personal background is actually in law, and that started many years ago now. Feeling a little old nowadays, but since that time and since 2007, I've been focused on what is now today Whooshh Innovations, and the purpose of today is to really this is our second webinar. It's I'm going to start by focusing on our mission, and then really laying out really our plan for 2023 and our plan for success here in the short term. So looking forward to talking with everybody today. And we also intend to leave some significant time for questions and answers, more than we had last time, so that we can try to get all those questions in.
Yeah, and to quickly just expand on that, if you do have a question for Vince throughout the webinar, please leave it in the Q&A chat box below. But also, please let us know if you are an investor or if you're from an organization, so we know how to properly address those answers. With that being said, Vince, I'm going to let you take the mic back and go ahead and start with the presentation.
Okay, thank you, Khalil. Well, welcome back for those who were with us last time, and for those that are new. Hopefully there's a little bit of on the front end here that will give you a sense of what we're all about. And I think Khalil told you about the forward-looking statements here briefly, but there's going to be less on the financial side of things, but simply because we're not allowed to talk about that here. And that's what this safe harbor forward-looking statements, just in case I say more than I should, you should not look at those as forward-looking. They are forward-looking statements if they are made. So I'm going to try to avoid that. At any rate, today, here's pretty much the agenda. I'm going to go over the why the world needs Whooshh right now. And the way that I'm going to address that is going over our mission, the investment case, and then our strategic plan. And there really are a total of only 15 slides here. So it's going to be a lot of me talking over the top of these slides, which are going to be trying to hit these main points. So I wanted to start with the mission, because really everything comes back to this. And if you really understand the mission, you can understand where we're coming from and why we're coming from there. It's important when you're in a space like we are, where you are quite disruptive to the traditional way of doing solving or trying to solve the problem. And you're disrupting an industry, an entire industry with it, which is what we're doing in a good way, I might add. But we're disrupting it. And when you're disrupting something, the narrative has to change. Why are you doing this? And a big part of our mission, therefore, is changing that narrative. Because if we change the narrative, then we can accelerate our the changes that need to be made, and also subsequently our growth. So the key words to remember are save, feed, grow, and heal. And I'm going to go through each one of these in the next few slides here. So we talk about ourselves as a fish first company. And So the save relates to save the fish. And I don't know if anybody saw this in the news just yesterday, but basically the Chinook salmon season was just announced closed yesterday up along the California coast for the Chinook salmon. And that had already taken place for this year that I'm talking about. And that had already taken place in Oregon and Washington. So the save the fish, really, from our standpoint, we are from Seattle area. This was was really trying to address this question, which became apparent a number of years ago. Is, hey, how are we ever going to change the path that we're on here? Where if you love to fish and you're a fisherman, and you can't even have a season anymore, you're losing, for many people, a real pastime. And for those who like to eat salmon, and those who like to just view them and have them part of the environment, this is a huge loss. The tribes that have been working this exact issue for years have been trying to get all of us to understand that the fish were in trouble and we needed to do more. And the problem has been that we were trying to do more, many people trying to do more, but doing it with the same tools. And so we finally, when we made the commitment to the company, we made the commitment to save the fish. It was to bring new technologies to a space that had not received any benefit from technologies to speak of. It was the same solutions that everybody was trying to perfect to try to help the fish, but have proven time and again not to be adequate. So saving the fish is what we're about, and bringing technology to this problem rather than just working with the water and maybe concrete in order to try to solve the problem, which seemed to us to be a pretty limited tool set to work with. So at the end of the day, we want to provide the world with product that helps save the fish. Okay. The second part of that is because fish are such a big part of feeding the planet. And by that, I mean the fish supply, with the world covered in 70% of the world covered in oceans, and then you add in the river systems as well. It's mostly covered in water, and for most of the world, over 50% of the world, most of their protein also comes from fish. But in the rivers, when those fish are returning from the seas and so forth, they're bringing in the nutrients, and when they die, they are resupplying those rivers with nutrients and so forth for the ecosystem as a whole. And if we don't have the fish supplying that portion of it, you end up with a dead river, effectively, because it can't support the ecosystem that was intended to be there. And the people on it is equally important as the rest of the ecosystem. And so people need the fish as well. It's not just the tribes, though the tribes are often very dependent on it. And it certainly means more to their culture than it does to non-tribal persons. But that doesn't mean it's less important for all of us. And so for the people on it, it gets down to as basic as, how are we going to feed the planet here if we don't have the fish? And so why don't we have the fish? there's been a lot of news that I don't need to go over here about climate change and the rising temperatures and so forth, but the fish are kind of the canary in the coal mine here, and they've been telling us for a lot of years we're not doing this right, and it seems as though we're finally catching on, and now we have some goals here that the United Nations and individual countries have set for changing to a clean energy grid. One of the things, though, that we came to realize fairly early on was this apparent, I want to say apparent conflict between the fish and hydropower. Certainly the dams get a lot of the fingers pointed at them for causing the decline of fish. But you only need to look at rivers that don't have any dams on them at all to realize that the problem is not just the dams. There's a lot of things, and a lot of it relates back to the climate change and the pollution that's associated with that, and the acidifications of the oceans and the effect that it has on nutrients. There's this cascading series of things that happen. And the dams, for us as people, we have become dependent on them in many areas of the world. In fact, there's 40 countries in the world where over 50% of the energy comes from hydropower. So our challenge from an engineering standpoint was, how do we, even if the world is planning to move away from fossil fuels and so forth, and trying to do it quickly, how can we do it as fast as possible? Because it's everything that we hear is that we're not moving fast enough. And that means that one of the world's largest, in fact, it is the largest renewable in the world, is hydropower. If you take it worldwide, you can't take that away and also get to your goal on clean energy. So that seems like an almost impossible problem, unless we do a better job of solving this problem for the fish. Let's come back and remember that it's about fish first. If we think about it from the fish's perspective, what do we have to do here to cause a recovery to begin, and set ourselves up for success here? It really came down to, we have to address the fish first, not last. Fish don't have a voice, and so they're treated as last. We also can't take down all the dams in the world. There's a million of them, and if we tried to take them down between now and 2050, we probably couldn't do it. So for all these reasons, we really felt like we needed to focus on the growing clean energy and turning this around a bit. This is where the narrative needs to change. It's an interesting fact that we have been able to drive this point home, that if, for example, in the United States, where you have 85,000 dams, and you were to try to take all of them down, if you took down a dam a day, it would take 235 years, just those 85,000. Okay, but of those 85,000 dams, how many of those are hydropower dams? It's about 2,500 dams. So it's a much smaller number, and yet, though there's a lot of focus on taking down those dams, sometimes for absolutely good reasons, and sometimes because they are on major rivers that are with high head, what's called the high head dam. The dams are tall and so forth because they produce more power. And we are in a position here to look at that situation and say, well, what can we do about this? How can, we've got a fish that's encountering a brick wall or a concrete wall, and they need to get to their spawning grounds, need to get past this without exerting so much energy and stress that they don't arrive safely and successfully. And we need the hydropower too. So that was the challenge. How do we allow for that to happen? Quick, safe fish passage without loss of power. In fact, how can we, for those dams that had hydropower, how can we actually enable them to be more efficient? And for all of those vast majority of dams that have no hydropower, this is the key insight that we came to conclude, is that it's the dams that do have hydropower that have the dollars to address the problem. And that's why there's been more attempts at hydropower plants, but also because the federal rules in the United States require that. Many of the non-power dams were put into place before state rules went into effect and so forth, and they don't have fish passage at all. However, if they put hydropower on those dams, fish passage is then required. Fish first. So our approach and is that we've got to step back and rethink, what are we doing here? There are some dams that should come down. I'm not questioning that. But there are many more that are going to be with us for a long time, and we can't have the fish not get past those dams during this period of time. And those which have no fish passage at all and no hydropower at all, and are up for other reasons like preventing floods from occurring or providing water for irrigation or for your home, these dams aren't going to go away, but can they be made to be fish friendly by providing fish passage? So that's really the crux of where we've come in. We've said we're not going to accept the argument that you can only have fish and no dams, or you can have no dams and have fish. The facts just don't bear that out. So if we're successful, what are we doing here? We're here healing the environment, and there's all these benefits that happen as a result of that. Sometimes they happen, in fact, when you do take down a dam, and the Elwha Dam in Washington State is frequently pointed to as the example of how fish recovery can occur when a dam comes down. But there's also narratives out there that are not honest with what actually happened, even at Elwha, where I agree the dam should have come down. They've got a national forest behind it and so forth. And those stories have to get out as well. What went wrong there? Is it really telling the story, therefore, of what happened? And in this example, there was a hatchery below that dam, and the fish, after the dams came down, the fish trying to return to those hatcheries, because the sediment that was coming down could no longer get back to the hatchery, their home to spawn, but instead went right past the hatchery and were in the river. It was those fish that quickly returned the next year that everybody was so excited about. It wasn't, it was the hatchery fish. It was just they couldn't get to the hatchery. That story hasn't been told. That's not being honest with everybody about how we ought to solve the next problem, because what happened there isn't being fully told. That is not the public narrative out there. And so I'll throw this one last thing out there. A lot of people know about the salmon cannon. The salmon cannon is a great fun term, and it was for our earliest systems that we made in 2014, and it was a hand load system as opposed to our swim-in systems today. They are still used often in hatchery type environments or broodstock environments where they're already handling the fish. But I like to think that what salmon cannon can also mean is salmon and with the C-A-N-O-N rather than C-A-N-N-O-N, meaning we're going to talk truth. And I think it's only when we do that can we honestly solve the problems from a technical standpoint, which is what we have been singularly focused on. So we are constantly trying to push away the red herrings, if you will, the arguments that are made that are not really founded in science. It's just it's data and science that's been twisted, and focus on the real issues. So that's great to have a super mission, but if you're an investor, why should I invest in this? It might be great for the world and so forth, but how is it good for the investor? And then I want to address that in the next slide here, because I'm not sure that you could really be in a space that is better for an investment, particularly at this point in time, if you just read the papers and watch the news. First of all, I hope I was making the case here a bit. There's a compelling need for this. Under the law, in most states and most countries now, you cannot have hydropower without addressing the fish passage. And when these dams come up for relicensing, which is every 20 to 50 years, those dams that have hydropower on them have to be licensed. And when if they didn't have fish passage before, they do when their license comes up for renewal. In most cases, it's not every case, but most cases. So there is a compelling need for both the dam owner and operator to put in fish passage. As we said, on sort of the mega trend scale, there's this energy market disruption that is happening today as we change from a carbon-based energy to a electric world that we're all living in as we move to EV, electric vehicles and so forth. The demands for power are more and more. And the thing that hydropower has, it is the best replacement in many ways for the carbon fuels, because it can be available 24 hours a day, where wind and solar aren't. And so if wind and solar are not available, you then end up relying upon a battery effectively. And the battery backup for the energy grid in the electrical market is hydropower. So hydropower, with these forces here, hydropower, we've just been very practical about this. It is a part of our immediate future during this period of transition to a non-carbon-based energy market. That's going to go on for the next 30 to 50 years. And during that time, unless we address the fish passage issues, we are not going to have fish left in 30 to 50 years. So this is the need. So who are the competitors out there? There aren't any competitors that do what we do the way that we do it. So we have been successful in obtaining 48 patents to date, and around the world in various key markets. And we intend to file additional patents here later this year, with that will not only extend some of our IP on our existing core technology, but broaden our patent portfolio. By doing that, this is not intended to prevent the proliferation of our technology. It is intended to assure our investors that we are going to have our fair share, should I put it, of of the effort and time and dollars that we've all put into it at this point, that comes back to us. And that we are able to do that because we don't just have a bunch of copycats doing what we've done and spent all this money developing over the years. So the competitive, what are we competing against today? Well, many of you have probably heard of fish ladders. There's also fish lifts, and there's trap and haul. I spent more time on this in the last webinar, but I'll just say, with regard to those three, none of them are as flexible as us. All of them tend to be more expensive. None of them are as sustainable as our systems. And in every instance we've done a study on it, our system has been as safe for the fish or safer than those other systems. There isn't a reason that our systems should not be put in most places, other than the fact that the consulting firms and engineering firms that are out there devising custom solutions at sites have not yet made the commitment to move to this different type of toolbox that we are providing that allows for faster, safer fish passage and less expensive for the customer. So that's changing. We can feel it. We know it's happening, and we'll get into a little bit more of that. I also the other investment case is this. There is from the Department of Energy for sure, but other agencies as well. What I'm saying is non-dilutive for the investor, government support. There is a ton of money. I mean, hundreds of millions of dollars that are coming from the federal government, either to the states or to projects within the states, for the purpose of environmental improvements at dams. And there's incentives that are being built in for the hydropower owners to also address these environmental concerns. Department of Energy knows, understands, and completely gets it that hydropower has to be a part of the solution. It's not the only solution. I'm not suggesting that, but it is a part of the solution, at least for a significant period of time during this transition. And in order to do hydropower, you have to address fish passage. That's back to the compelling need. It's required under the law. So then you get to market size. Why is this exciting? To go back to the examples that I brought up before, in the United States, if there's 85,000 dams, in the world there's a million dams, and if a fish passage project, let's just say you use a number like $2 million, and you do 1,000 dams, that's $2 billion, just with making 1,000 sales. Again, if the opportunity is so much larger, 1,000 dams in a market that's 1 million dams around the world, that's just a tiny, tiny percentage of the total market available to us. And that's why when we go through the math and look at the dams that are, if you will, ripe for having fish passage on them, you end up with a size of a market that's over $1 trillion. That's not to say we're going to have the whole market, but even a small part of this market is a huge number. Okay, leadership position. We are clearly there. I can tell you this because we have others who are concerned about the same issue, coming to us, asking for not only our ideas, but if they've got a product idea that they are interested in developing, coming to us to help and work with them and have a product that then is sold through Whoosh. And to me, that's really how we want the market to think. Ultimately is, hey, I've got a fish passage problem at my dam. There's one place to call, and that is Whoosh. Next is the leadership team itself. We have, I told you briefly about myself at the beginning here, and you'd say, well, why is an attorney involved in this stuff? I can only tell you that I'm not sure if you were in it, if I did not have the legal background I did, I'm not sure we would be where we are today, because it is so, the area that we're in it's so politically charged oftentimes, that much of this is really about politics and making sure that the funding is getting to the right problem rather than spending it on places where it's not going to produce a meaningful result. So fish passage is going to provide a immediate return for those agencies and those governments that invest in it, for their people and for their environment, and it will happen typically within just a few years because of the spawning cycle, if you will. The life cycle of most fish species is relatively short, and because they produce so many eggs, that you have an opportunity to really measure the impact that you can have. And I said almost everybody wins here because there is a loser in this whole thing, and that is probably to some extent it's to those who are benefiting today by extending the solutions at particular sites. So by that, I have a legal background, but I was never a litigator. But the litigators are almost certainly going to lose by this. That would be an example of a group that's going to lose out of this, because if you're arguing over something for 20 years, in some instances, about whether something needs to change or come down and so forth, a lot of attorneys are making a lot of money, but nothing is happening for the fish during that time. So mostly the fish win, if we can eliminate that. And maybe from my own legal background, that's the case. But with the rest of the leadership team, we have people who are experienced now, whether gained over years of working for Whoosh or because of their prior experience from the biological side of things to the sales side and marketing, that have put us in the position that we are today to seize this leadership position that I was just talking about. And really, from our perspective, it is that team, and then building that team further and giving the team the tools that it needs and the resources it needs to realize their full potential is why we're talking to all of you today. So compared to other startups, there's really less startup investment risk. Many times when you're investing early on in a startup company, they have an idea and haven't yet done that hard work required to even know whether or not this idea is going to work. And that's not the case here. We had a long road that we had to go down to prove that it was safe, efficient, effective, and most importantly for the customers, was reliable. That really took us years and years and years, and we did that with grant money and private money that has been raised prior to us asking start engine investors to get involved and make an investment on the crowdfunding site. So that whole piece of it, much of all the core technology development has been done. Products have been delivered, and for us, it is now about expanding that market and the applications. So it's not we're not hung up on the fundamentals, if you will, of is this can this product even be made? Will it even work? Those questions are answered. We know that because just doing some math the other day, calculating how many fish have actually been through a Whooshh system, and it's not all the same systems, but any system at all. And the number is probably about 10 million now, 10 million fish. That's a pretty big sample size to rely upon. That doesn't mean it's every species of fish. It certainly, and there's always endless species and conditions and so forth. But what we know is that if we have a fish enter the system, that the fish will safely exit the system, and that is the key to having a fish population that is going to be robust and grow. And if they're not stressed in that process, which is what our studies have shown, and we've done numerous studies in this, that has tremendous benefit, whether you're for the fish and for the recovery efforts that we all hope result. In the aquaculture space, it's also important if a fish is not stressed, because it doesn't taint the meat with the enzymes and so forth that are released when a fish is stressed. Cortisol levels are lower and so forth, and the fish has a longer shelf life as well. So even when a fish is no longer alive and it's in an aquaculture setting, having a non-stressed fish is a good thing. I mentioned the patents earlier, so I won't spend that time on that now, but some other things that were really important to us to understanding the business case was how much time would it take us to manufacture from the time that we received a contract or a purchase order to the time that we could deliver. And obviously the last couple of years through COVID and so forth were a challenge. But approximately 4 months is a safe bet in most circumstances. And much of the supply chain issues that existed in COVID have cleared up, though not completely. The average time to install a system is just about 7 days. So that is the compare to that might be several years just in a fish ladder setting, for example, or a fish lift. So the install time, and therefore the savings, both in dollar terms, but also cost to the site and the environment when you're trying to put this equipment in, is substantially less impact. And then I mentioned that earlier that we did this count up the other day. Well, how many fish species have we actually moved through the system? It's pretty remarkable. 54 different species of fish have gone through the system, and those really range in size from small, like a perch size fish, if you remember from your days as a kid looking into the lake, a little perch there, to 30 to 40 pound salmon, in that range, coming through the system. Even we have done some study with sturgeon as well. And so the reason that this is so important is that in our system, you have the ability to choose what fish you want to pass at a particular site. And in many systems, even when you have no dam at all, you have a free running river, any species can go past, and that includes invasive species. So that can be a real problem. Okay, let me run through this and then we're just about done. So how are we going to, oh, I skipped it. What's our biggest remaining obstacle? And it really comes down to reducing the time to secure a contract from first engagement. Much of what is in our pipeline today has been developed over the last 5 years. And I don't mean that it takes 5 years all the time, but sometimes it does. And it certainly takes at least a year in most circumstances. Well, that is, it's going to be hard for us to get to the scale that we want unless we do something about reducing the time to contract from first engagement. This is really where all of you come in and why we would love to see those investments hit right now, because here's what we need to do. And we can't do all of this without bringing in additional investment dollars. There's been some changes in the rules, the legal rules, starting in 2023 for small business. And small business here is $21 million or less, that allows us to do no bid government contracts in fish passage. Other spaces too, but the one we're obviously concerned about is fish passage. What this means is that from the time the government wants to procure, they do not have to go through the same bidding process that they typically would, where they'd send out an RFP, they would get all these responses back and so forth. And there's all this time. This is where all a year will go by in no time, just trying to solicit proposals. That's even before you get down to the business of deciding who are the top few companies you're going to focus on. So with the change in the rules, we've identified a company that is a specialist in this area that is going to help us get set up to do these new no bid government contracts and to speed up that process of sale. Second, we're going to launch a business-to-business or business-to-government e-commerce platform. That is something that we've already started working on. We've been working and tying that to some of our other systems and getting our content to the system, and we intend to launch that in Q2. Again, that's to decrease the amount of friction in the time, but just as importantly, it is to put out list prices on our product, so that when the government is trying to justify the price that we are charging, there's a list price that's out there, and they aren't trying to look for something that doesn't exist out there, which is a competitive product that they can compare to make sure that they're being charged an appropriate amount. But those rules, if we have a list price that we're offering out there itself, not just to the government, that provides the basis for justification on the contracts. Again, reducing the amount of time to contract. Three, we have been involved with what's called an emergency fish passage budget proviso. It's for $10 million in the Washington State Legislature. That is sitting in the budget presently. It needs to survive the reconciliation process, but we do have a support from both sides of the aisle, if you will, a sponsor from both the Democratic side and the Republican side in the state of Washington. That budget proviso is, it's an accelerator program. And again, it is intended to assure that the procurement process and actual delivery of a system from the time that money is made available is 1 year from the time that that money is available and requested for a particular project. So accelerating these timelines. Fourth is secure federal grant money for key influencer projects. We have several large customers that we're talking to, some federal, some non-federal. And the two largest on both sides, on the federal side, it's the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, and on the private side, Brookfield Renewable are both two of the largest dam owners, hydro owners in the country. And together, they're probably half of all of the dams, hydro dams. So if you look at those, if the way that others look at those, let me put it that way, if we put in projects for those customers, others will follow. So that is a target for us in this year that we look forward to when that happens. Trying to work around the legal rules here. 6, we want to negotiate long-term and recurring revenue contracts with multi-dam owners. So this is I skipped one here. I'll come back to it in just a second. This is important for our long-term revenue stream. We don't want to be in a situation where we've got lots of revenue because we have a big project and then drop down and so forth. And that can easily happen. The intention here is to have steady, strong growth that we can plan through. And those long-term and recurring revenue contracts are the ones that can help get us there. Let me go back to 5 for a second. That was an important one. Much of the monies that are available out there are made available through either the tribes or NGOs as well. That's usually federal money that's coming through those, but can also be state monies. And we as a private company cannot receive a direct payment. However, we can partner with tribes and NGOs and nonprofits and be a beneficiary of those monies. Typically, those tribes and NGOs need to partner with others in order to do it. And we will just be the most cost-efficient way for them to do it, because our products cost less and yet they can achieve what they're trying to achieve. So it's important that we be able to put more resources towards developing our relationships and our programs with those two groups. I mentioned earlier that we have companies approaching us about us acquiring them and so forth. We have identified a couple of very small companies, but key. They have key talent in them, and in some cases, some very niche but important technology that will further our reach with our product and so forth, and will be a revenue positive for the company. We have recently signed a letter of intent with one of those companies. We haven't announced that yet. That will be announced shortly, and are negotiating with the other. Okay, number 8. That top leadership talent, some of it can come through the acquisition, and some of it is having the resources to go out and help our existing team. We're about 1 deep in as much as we're trying to cover, and all of us are wearing a lot of hats, and it will be self-limiting here on the success that we can have unless we can add some help to our team here, who is done an amazing job for a long time. But we will all benefit by the fact of adding talent now, so that we can take advantage of the moment that we're in right now. And then we're going to secure some additional patent and trademark IP, and that's important for us and for the investors in the long run and the short run here. but it really relates in part to the next number 10 there. And that's positioning the company for a strategic or capital acquisition. If we are profitable, we have a net profit, recurring revenue, we're going to be attractive as to other companies for a strategic acquisition. If we are do the work right now in this year, 2023, to position the company for those things to happen in 2024, we will be able to, by doing that, take full advantage. So in terms of the scale, and we need scale if we're going to solve this problem worldwide. So it needs to be deep pockets that are ready to tackle this, and it is our intention to position the company through these steps here, such that that is an easy decision for, relatively speaking, an acquisition. It takes time. We've got to have the resources to do it, and we need to do that work right now. So I always like throwing in a quote here. The world as we have created is a process of our thinking. It cannot be changed without changing our thinking. Much of what I hope I was doing today was changing your thinking about how we need to be thinking about this clean energy situation and how hydropower is going to be a part of it. And it does not need and cannot be at the expense of the fish. In fact, the fish here have to be the first thing that we address. And if we do that now, right now, we have a tremendous opportunity. So when fish fly, they go whoosh. We can do that with additional investment. And I hope that I can answer your questions next here, and that we can get you to take a look at the Start Engine page there and choose to do that now. We are in a period of time here where the offering that we are making is not going to be up for a long period of time. It's going to be in the next month or so that will end, and you'll start seeing notices about that. So we don't want anybody to not invest that should be, and it should be from the standpoint of they have an interest in doing that and want to make an impact on the world as well at the same time. Okay, Khalil?
Yeah, definitely. And just to echo what Vincent said, it's, you want to get on the ground floor. Don't wait before it's too late. The campaign is live currently on Start Engine. Highly recommend to check out the race page. There's a lot of valuable information there. We do post weekly portal updates there. If you have any questions around financials, around projections, all that is on the Start Engine page. We can't talk about that on the webinar. So if you do want to learn more about that type of stuff, check out the race page. We do have roughly about 5 minutes left in the webinar today. So we will have some time for a question or two. Do see a question that came in here. Seattle Times is always covering the issue with removing dams all over the area, particularly the ones for Seattle Power and Light. But I never see Whooshh mentioned as being in consideration as a solution. Are you involved in talks with the agencies and government orgs that are wanting to remove so many dams around Washington?
Absolutely. But on that particular project itself, I can tell you that we've even filed a FERC, this is the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission process that they're going through, paper on that subject. I think it's a confusing process that that these agencies have to go through, and in the licensing process, and I will just say one of the benefits that we have of being on Start Engine and having over 1,200 investors now is that I mentioned earlier, this is a political process as much as anything. Investors speak up, mention it. I think you'll see it in some of the comments that came out of the Seattle Times recently on that article. You'll see a couple people have mentioned in there, what about Whooshh? What about Whooshh? You cannot say that enough, both to your representatives and to others, because the entrenched advisors and consultants, it is not to their advantage for Whooshh to be there. So that's the politics of this. That proviso at the state level, that is intended to be very much directed at those issues that you're addressing. They are not mentioned, and so all I can tell you here is that we are very much involved directly, including with leadership.
And again, just do want to echo, if you do have a question, please ask it in the chat box below, and I will ask the question to Vince. Unfortunately, for this webinar, we will not be taking live questions. So if you have a question, please ask it in the chat box below. Vince, in your own words, someone comes to you and they ask, I'm on the fence of investing. What are your top 3 reasons to invest in Whooshh?
Yeah, well, I'll answer that question. I hope I was laying out 10 reasons, but if you, the top 3, one is it's rare that you can invest in a company that is doing the right thing for you and your kids as well. So from a legacy standpoint, I think for those who that's an important thing to have a world that we can pass on here, and have helped make a difference, that will play to some investors. If you're investing from a pure financial standpoint, I think right now in this time, in the uncertainty that is in the world, we're in a unique position because of those government contracts I was telling you about and the long period of time that it's taken on the pipeline, and really everything stalled during the COVID period of time. It's now moving again, but we aren't going to be impacted in the same way in the market that everybody else is. The money is just arriving here from all the programs that were put into place and the budgets that were passed over the last few years. Those monies are just starting to make it to the projects now. So the upcoming recession, if it happens and so forth, we are very unlikely to be negatively impacted by that. So it's going to be our expectation is that we will be protected because of the space that we're in. And I think the third thing is we have a technology advantage. And people used a dial phone for a long time after there were push button phones. And then when there were push button phones, they did that for a long time when there was mobile phones. We have been at this sufficiently long time and been out there proving this for a sufficiently long time that the time has come, and the politicians and the public are demanding that these problems be addressed. And so the timing is right. The timing is right to see the company's valuation increase. All those things I was talking about were focused at increasing the valuation of the company. And that is, there's a path here for the investor to come in, invest, and exit that I hope is rewarding for everybody.
And that is going to be our time today. Vince, where can people reach you out if they have any more questions or just want to learn more about this opportunity?
Yeah, the best way to reach us is if you send an email to investor relations, there's 2 R's in the middle of that, investorrelations@whooshh.com. That's and ask your question, provide a little background and a way to contact you. And we can then be sure to get back to you. But it's a it's the most sure way that we can respond, because many times we'll get a question and we have no context if it's coming in through social media as to the person or how to respond to them directly, if that's not appropriate to be putting back in the public space, depending on the question and so forth. So if you come into investorrelations@whooshh.com, we'll get it to the right person and to a prompt answer.
Awesome. So if you had any questions that we weren't able to answer today, please email those questions to investorrelations@whooshh.com. And for those who weren't able to attend today's webinar, don't worry, this webinar has been recorded the whole time. So we will be posting a whole recap video around the webinar. So stay tuned for that. Thank you, Vince, for taking time out of your day today to go over this presentation and to answer some questions. And thank you to the audience for attending today. I hope everyone has a good rest of their week.
Thanks, Khalil.
Have a good one. Bye.
Okay.